in the world of sports-specific training, everything we do is its goal is to drive fatigue in muscles, whether we're lifting heavy weights, whether we're running, swimming, biking, doing speed training or jump training. The goal of this training is to create what's called a lactate threshold or burn. And this is studies right out of the University of Harvard. And what they're saying is that this intensity of training that creates the burn, and I tell athletes, you don't really need to understand all the science about this. What you need to understand is when you get in that exercise burn and you maintain that burn, that's when you tap into growth hormone. So we use tools. I teach everybody, we're using these tools of weights and training and time and load and volume to drive fatigue. And the most important factor of this training is how deep are you fatiguing these muscles? Because when you get down to this magic level of around 30% or 35%, this is where growth hormone is released. This is a study done on some middle-aged athletes measuring their biceps muscle, SMO2. It's an infrared spectrometer, oxygen in, oxygen out. But just know this, when they do traditional training, and this is training without bands, typical 3 sets of 8, 60% of 1 rep max, they're hitting a fatigue level 40 to 35%. Many athletes don't even get this far. But here's the problem we have today with athletes getting into this growth hormone. First of all, time constraints. Second, many athletes in this profession have pain or nagging injuries that we have to be careful of. And then we get into rehab situations where we cannot even come close to high intensity exercise. We're going to talk about that. How about in season? We have athletes who are in season and we can't risk high intensity because of the potential for injury. And now we add to the fact that many athletes are stuck at home and cannot obtain high intensity exercise. Well, when these athletes hit these high intensity levels, this is what it looks like from a growth hormone standpoint. If they're getting down to that 30 to 35% or that good hard burn, they're getting a small release of growth hormone. This is a study done on middle-aged men athletes getting a small release of growth hormone. But there's a much bigger problem in rehab. Rehab athletes are not experiencing any growth hormone. They're not able to push because of the injury or the surgery or the repair to get near growth hormone, to get high enough intensity to get growth hormone, which is so beneficial. That's why this is such a breakthrough. First of all, look at these athletes here. That's an athlete up at Lake Placid, one of our bobsled athletes who injured their knee and would have typically not been able to do any type of training. So he's doing training which is typically 20 to 30% of what he typically trains at. The athlete below is doing a jumping exercise. What's happening when the bands are on? The bands are simply modifying venous flow in and out of muscles. A lot of people think that this is like a blood pressure cuff. It's not. The function of a blood pressure cuff or a tourniquet is to create enough pressure deep into under the muscles to get to the arterial flow. Blood flow resistance training does not affect that, and especially B3 bands. What they are doing now is modifying venous flow, which in turn creates an oxygen change in and out of the muscle. And a muscle that's exercising is dependent on a steady rate of oxygen. Once the muscle starts running out of oxygen, you start to feel the burn. This is an activation of the glycolic pathway. You start to feel a drop in pH, which many people feel is lactic acid. But the first thing that happens that's so beneficial with BFR is we can very quickly, with less weight and less time, get into this desired level of burn in the muscle. The next thing that happens, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, which is also a profound change from typical training, is when you put the bands on and do lighter exercise, typically with heavier weights, you're ignoring slow twitch muscle fibers. Here, because we are using lighter loads, we activate slow twitch muscles, oxygen runs out, the motor unit then recruits fast twitch muscle fibers, and we get more of a complete recruitment of muscle fibers. As we go through this presentation and I share with you a lot of the instances of better results, this is one of the main reasons complete recruitment of muscle fibers in the typical training. But here's the real magic that I tell all athletes and all health professionals. You are able to create a deeper oxygen deficit or a deeper fatigue than you are obtaining with whatever type of rehab or training the athlete's doing. Let's call it 20%. And when you get a deeper fatigue, the body's response is much stronger. We're going to talk about nitric oxide and growth hormone. Here's the exact same men in a study, middle-aged athletes, putting the bands on, reducing the weight in half. Look at the oxygen deficit now that these people are hitting. They're doing less weight with the bands on, and they are hitting fatigue levels that's typically not obtainable. It's typically reserved for elite level athletes. And when these people, whether they're on the rehab table or they're a junior athlete or a high school athlete or even a pro athlete, when they hit deeper fatigue levels with the bands, growth hormone surges. This is a study. Look at the change in growth hormone with this group of middle-aged athletes when they exercise with BFR. This is a 25 times increase in growth hormone. Now, many people ask me, what are the different levels of growth hormone changes? In elite level athletes are seeing nice increases in growth hormone, but with less work. When you get into the rehab setting and amateur athletes, the change in growth hormone is significant because these people, these rehab athletes, these amateur athletes aren't typically training at the same level as pro and elite athletes. So what happens is we now have athletes doing less volume or load, but getting a higher growth hormone surge. And what's so beneficial in rehab is now we have athletes who are going through rehab and not realizing any growth hormone due to having to reduce the intensity and load that we put into that injured body part. And now we can get a fatigue response in that rehab that will stimulate growth hormone. The next substance that I want to talk to you about, which is very profound, is nitric oxide. Most of you know what this is. Many athletes take nitric oxide as a pre-workout to get that pump or that vasodilation. But what happens when you reach into this fatigue or pump or this burn as you're exercising? And athletes will notice it. It starts a few minutes into their exercise if they're pushing deep enough, and that's a nitric oxide relief. Why is this so beneficial? Because when you get nitric oxide from high intensity, you get better blood flow and more oxygen. You warm up faster. You rehab better. Rick, our special guest, is going to talk about that with his athletes. And studies show that when you have more nitric oxide circulating, you perform better. One of the techniques our athletes use is before participating in their sport, they will put the bands on and warm up. They won't do a deep, hard, fatigue full workout, but they'll warm up for 3, 4, or 5 minutes, simulating movements of their sport to get this nitric oxide going. And one of the additional benefits of better performance during activity, Rick's going to talk about this. There's a big benefit to athletes who are going through injury or rehab when they can get this nice pump or nitric oxide release. Well, I want to introduce Rick Burkholder. If I could get Big Mike back here to unmute him. First of all, we're super excited to have Rick on today. Many of you know Rick is the head athletic trainer, and he runs all of the healthcare for the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. He's the past president of the Professional Football Athletic Trainers Society. He's a member of the Pennsylvania Athletic Training Hall of Fame, winner of the 2016 National Athletic Trainers Association Most Distinguished Athletic Trainer Award, and 2017 recipient of the NATA's President's Award, honoring his contribution to the profession. And we're super excited to have him here today, and he's going to share with you what he's seen with BFR and how they're using it at the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. Rick, thanks for tuning in and joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Mike. That was a nice introduction. That just means I'm old. But I am excited to do this today. I will start off by saying this, that BFR to us in strength and speed training and all that we do in rehab is the latest and greatest science that we've been looking for when we first did pool therapies and gravity eliminated treadmills. So when our athletes ask me about, well, what is this BFR training? I try to water it down for them and make it as simple as possible and say, this is just like us putting you in an altered G to learn to run again. We use BFR as that component in rehabilitation. When I go out and speak to young athletic trainers, or I have interns in training camp, I talk about the fact that when you come out of school, you have this toolbox that they've given you through your education, through your curriculum. And that toolbox is about equivalent to a Sears toolbox. And then it's your responsibility to add tools to your box as you develop your career. If you want to work at higher levels, you've got to get that toolbox that 50-year-old man has in his garage. It's like 7 drawers and it's got every tool in it. And then any job that you want to do at home, you can pull the right tool out, and you're not trying to do it with a lack of tools. When you get to the National Football League or the XFL or big time college athletics, you better have a toolbox that looks like something in a NASCAR pit where it's got all kinds of things, because otherwise your athletes are going to go find it themselves. So BFR falls into that toolbox, and it's a very key tool, but that's exactly what we use it as a tool. So as athletic trainers and as scientists, we chase science, and then we use art to get our athletes as healthy, as quickly and safely as possible. BFR allows us to do that. It allows us to get our athletes healthy as quickly and safely as possible. I will give a plug to B3 Sciences here with their bands. We have almost every band known to man in this athletic training room, but the B3 is the choice, and here's why. One, it's waterproof, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use it in aquatherapy, and it's got the multi-chambers, so you don't need the big, cumbersome, wide strap, and then it's also detachable, so we can set our athlete up on it, and then they can move freely. Some of the bands that are out there, you have to be attached to the unit. Makes it real hard to do speed drills or box jumps or anything, a squat with that attached to it. And then finally, the cost effectiveness of B3. So I get I'm not in the athletic training program to benefit my financial being through B3. I just believe in the science, and I believe in their product. So that's just a little disclaimer there that I'm not in that program. My club will not allow it, but I think it's a great resource for other athletic trainers to make some income. Once again, this is a tool, and we use it as such. This was, as far as I know, it was first brought to the National Football League by Roland Ramirez and the staff at the Houston Texans. And they've presented to us a few times on it, and they've presented nationally on it. They used it almost exclusively for the strength development of Jadeveon Clowney when he ruptured his patellar tendon. And they took us through that case study, and it was very amazing. And then I think every NFL team jumped on it. And now I would imagine that all 32 NFL clubs are using BFR in their rehab and possibly in their performance training, weightlifting, that kind of thing. As a side note, I'd like to tell you that my staff, who makes me go, the 5 certified athletic trainers that I have full time, or the 4 certified athletic trainers that I have full time, and then the 2 fellowship athletic trainers, they are incredibly creative, and they've taken this tool and they've gotten with some of our other tools, and they've gotten very, very creative with it. And like any science, if you take the science and then you take the art of athletic training or the art of performance training, you can get really, really creative with these bands. Mike had some great videos there. He's taught me a ton about it. I review those and have shared those with my staff, and we'll continue to do that. I want to talk a little bit about the bands from a rehab standpoint. So I consider anything long-term in the NFL a week. Because we play Sunday to Sunday. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. It's a business. We only have 53 players, and so I've been tasked as the pit crew chief to get this car rolling, even if it's been in a crash. And so we use every athlete that's injured for more than a week is BFR trained. There's a couple things about it before you get into the pure strength development and speed and plyometric development of those athletes. But first, all of us that are athletic trainers on this webinar know that your athlete goes through a little bit of depression and a little bit of denial when they're first hurt, especially when they come out of surgery. They've been pumped full of anesthesia, and then they're given pain medicine, and I'm telling you that their ability to function mentally sometimes isn't there. And then they come to the athletic training room and they see all these high performance athletes going out to practice, and it becomes almost a mental health issue with them. BFR allows them to train earlier. And with the release of human growth hormone and some of the other hormonal effects of it, we have seen an uptick in our long-term rehabs, being in better spirits and being able to work harder and being happy, so to speak, as they get to use these bands. Obviously, the human growth hormone release helps healing faster. I don't think that as athletic trainers, we heal anybody faster, but what we do is we try to create as many opportunities for them to heal as fast as possible. This whole human growth hormone release is something different than I've ever seen in my career. Certainly we fight inflammation as we go, but we haven't been able to, as Mike said, scientifically been able to get that human growth hormone release without some kind of synthetic injection that's illegal or some other form of PED. So this has been interesting in our rehab process because we really do believe, as Mike said about his hip, that we're allowing these athletes to heal faster just because they have this secretion of human growth hormone. And then certainly the cortisol drop helps with the inflammation. And we know as athletic trainers, we fight inflammation every day. Play 16 games in a 17-week schedule, and then if you're good enough, you get to play 3 or 4 playoff games into the Super Bowl. The inflammation is an ongoing battle for us Sunday to Sunday, so this helps with that. We're able to use BFR to introduce strength training a little earlier in our rehabilitation. Some of your best orthopedic surgeons understand this concept, and they allow you to move into strength with BFR and some of the submaximal training loads, and you're getting some muscle recruitment there. So in our ACL rehabs, for years we felt that it was safe to be able to do mini squats between tables, balance, so that they don't quite have their proprioception. Now we do those mini squats with the BFRs on, and we're recruiting fiber that we weren't able to recruit before. We were just using that more so as a stimulant for circulation and some range of motion. But now with the BFR, they can do mini squats between the table, or they can do body weight squats, and they're actually getting some strength development. We've noticed that over the years, ACL, one of our battles was that we used to let the VMO atrophy to the point where that was a problem, and then they'd have patellofemoral problems. Now we can keep that VMO firing throughout just by using BFR and using the lighter loads in a shorter amount of time to stimulate that VMO activity with ACL rehabs. We use the BFR training in our pool and on our gravity eliminated treadmills. And this once again allows us, so when we put a person in the Alter G, we're trying to get their gait back. We're trying to get them to get all their motion in the ankle and get their gait into a normal alignment. But this allows us to also develop some strength when they're submaximal or less than body weight. So even at 50%, when we're teaching them to run again, if we have the bands on, we're getting some muscle recruitment that we wouldn't normally get so we double the benefit of working out in the Alter G. I'll take you through what Julie Freimeyer did with our quarterback, which was one of the most talked about injuries in football, and very few people other than Dr. Elatrash, myself, and Dr. Elatrash was Pat's second opinion doc, and then my physician, Dr. Paul Schreppel. We believed that he could come back and play safely at 3 weeks, but people who had that injury before didn't think that he could, because obviously with the pain of that injury, your muscle shuts down and everything. And he had really good, and I spoke in this nationally to the national media, that he didn't have any of the underlying risk factors, and he didn't have any kind of joint damage. So our whole goal was to get him firing his muscles as quickly as possible. And what we did was we basically put him in the pool. We played on a Thursday night. He got injured. We did all the MRIs and x-rays and had him examined. And Friday afternoon, he was in the pool, and we did some work with him. Saturday morning, we put the bands on him in the pool, and we hooked up an elastic strap to him, and he did drop backs, and he got a good overload in his muscle without really putting that patella at any risk. So it's all creativity. I don't have any cool videos like Dr. Mike does or pictures, but I do have that video captured on our phone and on my phone. And what I told you is my staff is super creative. Julie Freimeyer, amazing athletic trainer, and her mind wanders all the time about what she can do next. So from a rehab standpoint, that's how we use the bands. I'll tell you a little thing that we found in the last 3 years is our athletes that have patellar tendonitis, which is a real battle in your jumping sports like basketball, volleyball, but we see it in football too. We've had unbelievable success with BFR and patellar tendonitis. So once again, it's a tool. We'll do different kinds of modalities like dry needling and cupping and Graston to make sure that these athletes don't have trigger points and fibrotic tissue up in their quad. That's what we're seeing is, so the athlete that has patellar tendonitis, it's disabled by it, they can perform, just not at a high level without pain. Well, when we examine them, they have trigger points and they have tightness in their quad, and then their VMO shuts down, and then their tracking goes lateral rather than in a straighter line. And what we found with BFR is if we needle these players and get their trigger points out of their quad and then do BFR training, within a week, we've had guys that were symptomatic for 4 or 5 years through college, and within a week, they are pain-free in their training. Now, I know that these guys are genetic freaks, but I think that some of that NO2 release and the drop of cortisol and then the human growth hormone, plus allowing their VMO to fire so hard, has really allowed those guys to come back pretty quickly, and they're amazed. Usually what happens when we have a player that has patellar tendonitis, they go through our protocol, and then what they do is they go out and buy the bands for themselves so that they can train with them when they're on their own. The next group is just performance training. So that's what I consider our healthy guys. And it's interesting because this is a tough concept for football players because they're trained as no pain, no gain. And they want to train for hours and hours and hours, and they want to tell you how much they put on a bar. And really, so I have a fullback here who can, bench 500 pounds and squat well over 500 pounds. And he tells me every day about how much he lifts. And I'm like, how much stronger do you want to be? Let's work on your feet. Let's work on getting some of your slow twitch and fast twitch muscles going. And he's bought into the BFR training. He has a set of bands on his own, trains in the off season with them. In season, he uses it as a finisher workout. So he likes to lift. All football players like to lift for the most part. And then he'll put the bands on and do a finisher. What that finisher does for him is it gets him to total exhaustion, total muscle recruitment, so fast twitch and slow twitch muscle, as well as the human growth hormone release that they don't get in a normal lifting session. And so we've seen big effects of that. Interestingly enough, to get a guy to do a finisher in season is tough, but the little pearl here is they see immediate results, and these guys love to have big arms and what I call mirror muscles, right? So you put the bands on the upper extremity and you get them to do a finisher workout, or you put them on the lower extremity and do a finisher, or both. I like to have our athletes wear them lower and upper because I think that they get a bigger growth hormone release. And what we do with our guys, scientifically, we saw that if you do, this is the healthy guys, if you do 25 to 33% of their 1 rep max for a set of 30 seconds rest, a set of 15, 30 seconds rest, a set of 15, 30 seconds rest, a set of 15, that's where we're getting maximal human growth hormone release. And oh, by the way, it makes your muscles boom. So these guys like to do it because they look better, and that's what they're about. But they're getting scientific results from the human growth hormone release and the NO2 release and the cortisol decrease. And then they're also getting strength training in fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fiber. So it's been a big help. With our healthy guys, this is interesting. We do one big picture day here, and not just the still pictures, but we do all the stuff that you guys see on Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, where they're standing there and they're I'm Chris Jones, Mississippi State University defense tackle, or whatever the hell they say. A lot of these guys will do BFR right before they go do those shoots because their muscles are just boom, and they're so vascular, and they're in a better mood and everything, and they go out and do it, and I laugh at them, but that's kind of the way it is. I've had a couple professional wrestlers in here stop by just to get some advice and use our facility, and almost exclusively that group, which is all cosmetic and optics, they're using BFR backstage because they don't have big weight rooms in these arenas. So they're getting benefits from it. Those are just side notes, kind of a cosmetic thing. And some of us on the call are into cosmetics. So I thought I'd say that. From a family and friends and personal experience, I think that as athletic trainers, if you're using the bands, we all struggle to find time to work out. And my pet peeve is I go over to the weight room to work out, and then Andy Reid calls and says, "Can you come up here? I got a scheduling issue," or "I want to talk to you about our roster," or whatever. And so, your 45-minute workout becomes 15 minutes. Well, 15 minutes we can all find. We don't keep the bands on anybody more than 20 minutes. So for you as a healthcare professional, we got to take care of ourselves first, and we do terrible with that. I think it's a great way for all of us to stay in shape. Your body temperature goes up, your heart rate goes up, your VO2 max goes up, plus you're building lean muscle mass, which helps our metabolisms, and we all struggle with that in season. So that's from a personal standpoint. From a family and friend standpoint, I have 2 triathletes in the area, and those triathletes, bodybuilders, all the people that train in your hometown, but they have other jobs, they come to you for advice. So I've sold the band idea to them, cuts back their training. They all work for a living, and then they got to go do a 20-mile bike ride and a 2-mile run at night. We're able to not really cheat the system, because it's not cheating, but we cut their time of training down, and they're getting good crossover benefits. I have one of those triathletes that has a true hamstring strain while he was doing speed training, and he's got the bands now, and he can't believe what effect it's having when he thought he was going to be on the shelf for 2 or 3 weeks because he had this hamstring strain. So that's good. And then my daughter's a pretty high level tennis player. Her dad is a little bit more optimistic maybe than some, and I'm a little rough on her, but she trains with the bands in our house because she doesn't have time, and she doesn't have a weight room to go train at and do it. So she does the bands, and although she told me that upper body wise she doesn't see it, her coaches called me this week and told me that her forehand, backhand, and serve are better than ever. And I attribute that a lot to the bands. Her lower extremity training with the bands, and she's not doing really hardly any weight with it. She's just putting the bands on, and she's using bands, resistance bands. The one thing that her coaches are emphasizing with her right now is that she does her first 3 steps after she strikes a ball is important for her to get back into position. And she struggled with that her whole career. They see an incredible increase in her foot speed to get back to that 3-step back into the normal area. So I've seen it with professional athletes. I've seen it with amateur athletes that are working people. I've seen it with athletic trainers. I've seen it with our general manager, and I've seen it with my daughter. So I'm a big believer. Once again, my my disclaimer here is that I get no money from B3, but I believe in the science wholeheartedly, and it's a huge tool in a toolbox that is NASCAR ready.
So what's the next step? Well, first, we want to thank you for tuning in today. Get back to the person who referred you. Whether you were referred through the Innovate AT organization or a link from Adam or a LinkedIn, get back to the person who referred you. If you came from the B3 side, then one of our consultants also referred you. Just get back to the person who referred you. First thing you want to do is get your bands and experience the results. I tell all healthcare professionals, you know, you've seen a lot of information today. Here's where you start. You start by getting these bands and putting them on yourself. And I can tell you in 2 to 4 weeks, you're going to experience results and have a great understanding of this. And then you're going to know how to implement it in your athletic training and performance world. We have special discounts on extra sets for healthcare professionals. Remember, money back guarantee and the zero down, zero financing if anybody's looking for that. So to conclude, make sure you take these email addresses down so that you can get a hold of B3 Sciences. I want to first encourage everybody to get on the newsletter. This is a way you can stay tuned in. We'll send out anywhere from 2 to 4 newsletter per month by email. We'll send you results, studies, exercise videos, things that you can implement. So first thing I'd encourage you to do is email support@b3sciences.com and just simply put newsletter in the subject or say, hey, put me on the newsletter. If you have general questions about anything and you need a place to get those, again, support@b3sciences.com. Personal fitness questions, as you purchase the bands, you're going to have access to our coaches. But look, if you have some questions now and you need a place to get those answered, personal fitness, email coach@b3sciences.com. And as a healthcare professional myself, you know, I'm very busy running the company, but I am going to make myself available. So if you have some what I would call high-end questions, meaning, hey, Dr. Mike, is there any science on this? Or what do you think about this? Or what do you think about this performance for this athlete? I'll be glad, you know, to answer those questions for you. If you become one of our consultants, I'll be glad to get on the phone with you and assist you in implementing this tool to get great results. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Again, we're going to have this recorded presentation available. And now I'm going to end the recording.